So welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for being here. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Pinar. I'm partner at Sauer, and we are an architecture and design studio with the mission of addressing social and urban problems. We do recognize it's a very ambitious mission. So naturally that comes with robust research and collaborative and diverse participation of various stakeholders in our research. So what's wrong with is the embodiment of that. Back in 2017, we said there's no solution to any problem without the education and awareness of the end user. So us doing this research internally is not necessarily that helpful. We should be having these expert talks, diagnostic discussions, ideations in public. So our sort of expert talks turned into a podcast series, and our like diagnostic ideation sessions turned into panel series. So today we'll be talking about what's wrong with tech. And before I guess kicking off the conversation, I would like all panelists to sort of introduce themselves, and I'll just go in like name order. Maya, do you want to start?
Sure. It's great to be here. I'm Maya Matarik. I am, I'm a roboticist. I guess I do AI, but what I really do most of is I work with interesting people whose mission in life is to create and use technology that helps other people, and specifically helps people who have some sort of a disadvantage. So we really have a mission, I would say, a hope, a goal, to create human-centered technologies that are not just convenient. So it's not so much about convenience and kind of making your life easier, but it is about making your life better if your life was made less easy by circumstances out of your control. So we work a lot with, for example, individuals on the autism spectrum, stroke victims. Lately, we're getting into anxiety and depression. So many populations that could benefit from technologies that are properly designed and aimed at helping them. Rather than maybe being a side effect of some consumer product or, you know, just plain being overlooked. So I'm actually a professor of computer science, but also neuroscience and pediatrics at the University of Southern California. And I run a big robotics lab with amazing, amazing students. And so that's me.
We're so lucky to have you here today. Melinda, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Melinda Brianna Epler. I'm the founder and CEO of Change Catalyst. At Change Catalyst, we build inclusive innovation globally. So through a series of events and a lot of training and consulting around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the tech industry. Most of my work is focused on helping leaders and managers and then people across the company to develop more diverse, equitable, and inclusive companies, teams, products, to really, you know, make the world a better place. I do a lot of work on building allyship skills, building empathy, and then the inclusive leadership skills to really create the change internally in companies.
Thank you for being here, Timothy.
You know, this is such an amazing panel to be a part of. Wow. Yeah, I'm Timothy Summers. I'm the executive director of Digital Trust Initiatives at Arizona State University. You know, my background is that I'm a serial entrepreneur. You know, I was a kid born in Mississippi, grew up in New York City. But I got to tell you, in my youth, there wasn't a whole lot of technology around where I was growing up. But you know, my sort of journey has taken me in a bunch of different places, and I'm so grateful to have been in. I do a load of work in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. I also do quite a bit of work in distributed ledger technologies. Of course, there's been loads of interest around NFTs in that space as of recent. And I lead a team here at ASU focused on building a technology that's a digital wallet for learners to be able to capture the evidence of their learning and take it with them throughout their lifelong journey. We're very much focused on support and allyship in various capacities. And the interest there has really been around designing and building innovative technologies that are encouraging and empowering for people everywhere. And you know, it just really is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. All of the serial entrepreneurship that I've been involved with has been in some way, shape, or form to try to drive positive change and intentional change. My areas of focus kind of on the in the back of my mind a lot of times, but very much on the front of my mind and interwoven in a lot of my ideas are design thinking, emotional intelligence. I spent quite a bit of time in my doctoral research doing a lot of work around that, and wrote a body of work on hackers and how they think. And so a really important and very sort of a passion of mine is to help anyone and everyone who wants to be amazing designers and amazing innovators to do that. And whatever I can do to be a part of their amazing journey, I'm happy to. And just thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you so much for being here. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. I'm super excited about this conversation right now. So I want to really collect my thoughts. I don't want to say this is a very timely conversation because I feel like this needs to be like an everyday conversation. Since technology is so integrated in our lives and is so fast paced, the more reason we really need to understand what's going on in the industry, what are the issues and how can we address them. And so that we can really unleash the potential of the industry, which is really the power of enabling a better future for the people and the planet. And speaking of planet, today is Earth Day. And I think like whenever we're talking about taking action in, climate change or how do we achieve zero emissions, often, if not always, we talk about technology, because I think we very much realize that the solution lies in the true collaboration between human behavior and technological innovation. On the other hand, when we look at social issues, I don't think it comes off that evident to so many. And I think that's interesting. There are many, tech companies out there that are trying to address social issues or have it in their corporate, responsibilities. And yet I think whether that is through media or just like prejudice or, Hollywood, whatever that is, there's a lot more echo around, it feels like the risks, the threats, how it can actually further deepen some systemic issues or social issues around technology itself too. I guess to kick off the conversation, how did we get here? Like, why do you think that happened? And what are some of the reasons that have us, think of some legitimate risks and threats and other factors? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, go Timothy, go for it.
Oh, I will, sure. I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. I was actually feeling that that my perspective probably, is just incredibly limited in a lot of ways. But one of the things that I think is really important, I was immediately drawn to the research. There was some research that came out of Harvard recently around AI, and Maya, you probably will know exactly what I'm talking about. But specifically, there's an amazing researcher there who demonstrated that, and this is just one example. But she demonstrated, and actually there's a documentary on Netflix right now. I believe it's called Quo Bias. And in that film, she's demonstrating that when she showed her face, and her face is quite similar to mine, the machine couldn't recognize her. And then when she put on a mask, a white mask, the machine could recognize her, recognize that there was a face. And I think that, the way that she sort of presented those findings, I thought was incredibly powerful, because, the way that she really organized the thoughts there was that, what we've done is that as we've been designing some of these and building some of these really complex technologies and forming these really complex human structures, we've along the way, been so fascinated by the tech in so many ways and have sort of either forgotten maybe in some places, or maybe just haven't been incredibly forefront to mind for some around the sort of human need. And so a lot of the conversations that I'm having with my team these days are really about trying to understand, what's the human need? What exactly is it that we're trying to do or be? And I'm actually been drawn. There's another researcher out of England, and I'm gonna draw up Ada's last name is Paris. Ada Paris actually asked she shared a very probing question with me that I thought was incredibly fascinating. And she said, Timothy, I believe that it's time for us to start thinking about what kind of ancestors we want to be. And I thought that was really interesting and very powerful.
This is always the danger of being nice and letting someone else go first. And then they say these wonderful things. And now you're like, oh, I can't follow that. I should have gone first. I love that last line. That is exactly right. I try to inspire all of my students who, you know, kind of have to listen, and then everyone else who maybe doesn't have to listen, but hopefully is listening, is to think about their legacy. So I think people think of their legacy as something that, you know, old people think about that, or, you know, or like presidents think about that. But in fact, we all have to worry about our legacy, and we have to think about it right away, you know, not later, because obviously you can't change your legacy later. It's too late. You got to worry about it every day.
Yeah.
But not worry, but care about it. And so I think that's exactly the same thing, is that with every action that we take, it's a choice. And I think having a sense of agency, realizing that all the things we do, we by and large do by choice. We may not feel like that we do. And I say this a lot to young people who are choosing what career they'll go into. And in my field, in computer science, you can go out and get paid huge amounts of money to do things that you have no control over, that you might not really feel are changing the world for the better, but oh, it pays well. And people do have debt and they need to get paid. And so now you're making a choice. You're making a choice between doing what you really care about versus being able to pay the bills or enjoying a happier life. And well, in terms of resources anyway. And so I'm always trying to push them and say, don't give up your hopes and your dreams, and realize you're making choices. And maybe if you are making this choice in the near term, make sure it's in the near term. Don't sell yourself short. So that's a legacy piece. But I think to answer your first question, how do we get here? I think we got here because people are, you know, we're very kind of in group, out group, I don't know, kind of discriminating species. We evolved and we are so successful as a species, if you look at evolutionary biology, by kind of like fighting for ourselves and against others. And what we defined as other is what matters, right? And there have been some beautiful studies in psychology, and I will not know who did them. So you just have to Google, I can't remember. This is the aging professor thing. But there's some beautiful studies in psychology that have shown that you can actually, by talking to people, you can change their perception of who is a part of their in-group versus out-group. So that means we as humans are perfectly able to grow and change and be more inclusive. But our natural knee-jerk reaction is the opposite. And so not surprisingly, we see differences in, you know, color of skin, facial features. We're wired to detect them. And therefore we consciously and unconsciously respond to them in not the best ways, but we can very easily change and be trained to change and learn to change. And so that's where the promise is. But yes, our evolutionary roots are not helping us, I gotta say.
Yeah. Melinda.
Yeah. I've thought about this for a long time. And how do we get there from an industry, a technology industry perspective? And there's a few things. One is just kind of general nature of capitalism. And I don't want to go too much into that because I think everybody can kind of think about that and understand how that might play a role. And that, a part of that I think is like getting what you want and working toward what you want and not really thinking about the long-term consequences. On Earth Day, thinking about that from an Earth perspective, thinking about that from an equity perspective, an Earth equity perspective, all of those things. And the other is historical power and privilege, and that when you think back to some of the key people that started these big technology companies, right? They had an amount of privilege to be able to build a technology startup in their garage, create solutions for people like them, right? They created solutions for people that looked like them, lived like them, and they had the resources and the technology to be able to do that. That takes privilege. and the runway to not have the income while they were doing it. All of these things, the education to be able to do it, the networks to be able to find the investors to move it forward, right? All of these things allowed certain people of a certain type to, and privileged to be able to build those initial startups. And then they hired their friends, and their friends hired their friends. And they didn't think about who they were hiring, except that they just hired people that were in their networks. And something like somewhere around 70% of white people don't have any non-white friends, right? So you have this kind of perpetual cycle of a network bias. And then we also have the kind of historical inequity that has been built into our education systems, right? Where some people have access and other people do not. And then into our workplaces were built and our workplace processes were built before a lot of us were even able to work legally, right?
Yeah.
And we've never changed them. We've never dismantled them. We've never really worked to fundamentally rebuild those systems, the education systems, the criminal justice systems, the workplace systems, and all of that. And so, in order to change it, we have to actively work against it. We have to actively work to change it, and that takes us thinking outside of ourselves, thinking about the impact of our products, the impact of our work, the impact of our lives, as both Timothy and Maya talked about it, on other people, on our planet as well, and changing the hiring systems, changing our education systems, changing that access and opportunity, really thinking about, what products are we building for whom? How is that impacting everybody?
Yeah.
And, Maya said that we're wired to detect color, but we're not wiring our technology to detect it, right? We have to actively work to do that. Otherwise, we end up with AI that miscategorizes Black people as baboons, we build driverless cars that run into people with different colors of skin, and we have to actively work against those systems, against those biases that we've learned through our culture, through our society, through those systems, and work to change it. And it takes all of us to do that, because all of us are either working within that system, so complicit within it, or working actively against it.
Yeah, actually, I would like to jump in on that if I could. I think there's now kind of a healthy move to recognize some of the issues that have been with us forever. But I think there's something also not so great happening about it, which is now places and institutions in particular are hiring diversity officers. And these individuals now have to take the full burden of solving this problem. Like, oh, well, that person will do it. And I really, I think, again, it's about legacy, impact, and responsibility. Everybody has the responsibility. It's not my diversity officer's job to figure out how we will get diversity at every level. And so that is absolutely the solution, right? You would not have a piece of technology that sees Black people as, I can't even say it, if you had any Black people on the team developing this, right? So it's a complete no-brainer, and yet it isn't happening. And it isn't just the diversity officer's responsibility to fix it. It's everyone's.
That's a really strong point. And, this resonates with me on so many levels. I was thinking about, and apologies if you can hear the yard people outside, but I was thinking about, how when we were in school, for example, I remember loads of my friends being very excited about going to Silicon Valley. And I remember, going myself and talking with some of my friends. And at the time, that was where all the magic was happening. If anyone was innovative, you were in Silicon Valley, right? And I just remember feeling I just remember feeling unwelcome in the venture groups. I can't put my finger on it, but I think everyone who has ever experienced some of the things that Melinda and Maya both were talking about, it's like, it's there and you just know you're not the right person. Like you just don't quite fit in with the group. And it was really fascinating because when I went back to the East Coast, loads of friends would say, well, why didn't you go to Silicon Valley? Why didn't you stay out there? I mean, that's where everything is. And it wasn't, there were a couple of things, I guess, but there were mostly things I noticed that there weren't any women in the groups. And here I was, someone who, grew up, my mother and my father both were incredibly, just are amazing people. My mom was one of the most brilliant people I, met. And so from my perspective, I was thinking there's not enough neural diversity. How do we get more of that? And if there's one thing I can kind of, I'm hearing all of us talk about in themes, Pinar, is around neural diversity. There being in my eyes, that's a no-brainer. To me, it's a no-brainer to include minds and ideas and perspectives and asking people or enabling people or empowering people to really share those perspectives. So it's something that I think that Melinda really hit it on the head in terms of how we've gotten here. And now I'm really, I find myself being incredibly charged to challenge everyone that I work with and that my friends, my family, all of us. I find myself challenging us to push ourselves further. This is something that, I guess as an ethical hacker, I guess in my mind, I think, we have to get there and then challenge ourselves. So what's on the other end? Like, why aren't we asking these questions? Which is why forums like this are just so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, if you don't mind jumping in yet again, but this feeling of always being different, of always being an outlier. So I was saying in some other group that I was talking to, yes, and this is exactly my experience, right? An immigrant, a woman in a male-dominated field, later a mom who was not willing to put up with things like, oh, we're going to have a meeting at 8. Why should we have a meeting at 8? Just because you are not taking care of kids and I'm somehow now at a disadvantage for being a good mother? No, we don't. And then, I would say, well, this is a family-friendly organization according to this rule. So I'm sure we all agree that we don't need to have a meeting at 8 when we could have it at 10. And then a bunch of other people would email me separately saying, oh, thank you so much for doing that. It's really inconvenient for me too. But someone has to say it. Someone has to say it and someone has to take the risk. And so there's so many ways in which we're more similar than we realize, but, things just perpetuate by status quo. And so I think, I've heard lately some discussion about how it is a power to be different, right? And it is. You can bring organizational change if the organization is willing to listen. So we do know that, but we don't act on it enough. But I do tend to think of it now. It's almost like a superpower. It's like, yeah, I'm always the outlier. So I'm always just gonna, and all this agreeability. Well, we do know from science that agreeability is also overrated. So sometimes you got to do that, but unfortunately, you can't do it when you are when you don't have any power and influence and status. And that is the thing. For those of us who eventually now do, well, we have to use it for everyone else. You have to pay it forward and backwards and sideways. But how do you get there?
100%. And this ties into, doing advocacy work, but also allyship, right? What Melinda talks about often. And I do want to touch upon that. Before that, I want to sort of tie what all of you are saying. And I think what's really interesting that more on a biological, as a human species, how do we sort of, start off with yes, we do identify differences, right? But how do we interpret those differences are more about how we're raised, what are the social norms, what do we see in the system, what are we exposed to? So it's a learning all these biases and sort of prejudices we develop over time. And then that sort of carries on to, I guess, the systems and the workplace and the companies that are being created. Those whatever we grew up with sort of is poured into that, and coupled with I guess capitalism and whoever has the privilege and power, their biases sort of gets amplified as they're trying to make more money because it's a capitalist, and I think in doing so, and this may be intentional or unintentional, right? Like a lot of, the tech companies in the industry are also founded by many young people. And there's also like the excitement of innovation. Oh, I made this work, and you're not thinking about anything else. You made that work, right? And then like, how do you make that a business? How do you make money off of it? And I think a lot of important questions do not get asked as you're in that momentum, right? That excitement. So if it's unintentional, then you're seeing a lot of consequences later on. And sometimes it is intentional, right? Like even like calling friends of friends and turning maybe the workplace into a boys club, like that is kind of like, no one spoke up to that. Like no one found that weird, like it's kind of goes back to, people who are, the outliers. As you said, Maya, like it takes a certain status and comfort and to get to the level that you can advocate for yourself and others. And until you get to that stage, who are your allies? And why don't, like, I think allyship has been, maybe even because of last year too, more and more of a conversation recently. But this is like very much human reality, right? This is human psychology. This is actually like sociology, anthropology. Why haven't we seen more allyship? And how are we, like, I think it's like not until and I work in many like diverse environments, whether that's like different cultural backgrounds, like religions, abilities, disabilities, like that's my work environment. But I don't think I really like grasped until like several years ago where like, oh my gosh, silence actually is very dangerous. Like I think that hit me, like I think I really understood it like later, even like later in when I was, like part of like an inclusive, design space. So why is that? Why, like, do we like, is there a psychological factor around that? Why do we freeze in the moment and don't speak up? Or why do we think something that we're doing is harmless or it's not our responsibility while we're all living in the same planet in the end?
Something came to mind as I was listening. Pinar, this is such a great topic. There's around the silence, and that's so powerful. I remember sitting in a meeting, and there were some very serious topics we were talking about, and the presenter said, "Any questions?" And everyone just sat there, and no one had any questions, and no one responded. And the more and more I've worked in organizations, the more and more that I learned that this is actually quite common. Whereas in sort of the way that I am, we all are who we are. If I see that there's something there, I'm like, oh, what is that? Curious, asking lots of questions. And I think, among many other challenges, I'm sure Maya and Melinda will have lots of perspectives on this as well. It seems to me that at some point, it became the in thing to do to just agree, get along, and go forward with it. And I just don't think I think, history, if anything, history's shown us that that's not the best idea, especially when we're talking about things that impact us so deeply and so broadly. The questions and conversations that we're having today around technology are impacting all of us, even people that aren't here yet. I mean, I think Melinda even made a great point earlier about much of this sort of scaffolding that we're working within is stuff that's existed since before, we even came into the scene. I think that there's a lot of room there for us to grow, but I'm also, there's a part of me that feels very, very, very strongly about where we've come from and where we are. And like, there's so much we have to do better, right? And constantly asking the question, help me make this better, right? And I'm also incredibly encouraged by the fact that we're having this conversation, by the fact that we are talking about inclusivity on so many levels. We've talked about not just race, not just gender. I mean, but we also are seeing disability. How do we, there's like, I think it's like 1 in 5, there's over 1 billion disabled people in the world. I mean, from whatever, that's defined as. And I think I'm always incredibly encouraged by a friend and someone who I just think is incredibly well-spoken in this area when she says, see me for who I am. Like, first you need to see me. I think for so long, we haven't been seeing people. And just, not to go back to the technical AI work that we were talking about earlier, but that's also what kind of came out of that research was this aspect of really, when you looked at the data we were feeding to the machines, it was all so homogeneous. It was all just the same kind of images. So how can we expect the machine to know anything different if that's what we're feeding it? And that's and it's interesting that we haven't pieced that together with the human mind, because it's really literally what we've been trying to do in many aspects of AI. And Maya can correct me on that way better. But it seems to me that we haven't been thinking about our brains as learning machines, as human beings, as learning machines, and we are. So,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I like that very much. I think we spend a lot of time talking about how we're making machines learn, right? So, AI is going to be great and it's going to learn and robots will learn. It's like, what about people learning? Why are we not thinking about how we're going to help people learn in order to be, more accepted, more inclusive for everyone's sake, right? So it's somehow, people are the way they are and this is good. And by the way, I do a lot of work around people talking about personality and this general idea that you are the way you are. And there are even, political connections with personality, et cetera. This is all bunk, right? Someone's making a whole lot of money on like Myers-Briggs, but that's completely unvalidated. In fact, what turns out to be the case is people have some predispositions, but they are completely situational, right? You could be a quote unquote introvert who loves to give public talks. You could be an extrovert who just really likes to take a lot of time off and be on their own. So this idea of fixed personality, I also think it's really dangerous, right? Because it's this typecasting, and it comes from people loving to get some numbers and scores. Okay, so let's acknowledge that we love that, and let's all take like, frozen surveys and see if I'm Olaf or if I'm Sven or if I'm Elsa, but not actually take that seriously and then employ people or not employ them or typecast them, because none of that stuff is valid scientifically, none of it. But of course, because there is a business proposition, because somebody is silly enough to pay money for this to make their job easier. Oh, I can't figure out who to hire, so I'm going to use this completely unvalidated, terrible thing that's going to do something for me. It won't do a good thing. So that is a risk, I think, with technologies, is people are not taking their time to really care. They're just kind of outsourcing it to a machine, which is not informed well. And people will continue to sell software and products that are not good because, hey, if you can sell it, people try to sell it, right? And so that's not a good thing. I see this especially in the health space. I see people getting out with products and making claims that are completely unsubstantiated. And it's very dangerous right now because we just went through a period in the US, certainly, which was very anti-scientific, right? Science was denigrated. And it's literally science that's saving all the billions of lives that could otherwise die in the pandemic. So scientists are saving our lives. And I can say that because it's not me. I wish I could say I was the one, but I'm not. I'm not developing vaccines. But someone's out there working day and night to save lives, and yet we're not celebrating that. So there's this kind of lack of understanding of, back to the point of, who are you? What drives people? Understanding that, you got a lot of scientists whose entire driver is just to do good. Not to make money, right? And then so understanding people and what drives them and how we value them, we have to take the time to do that. It is not a quick thing. You have to actually care. And it's inefficient because you have to meet with them and talk to them, but it's great. It's so satisfying. And the thing I always tell everybody who is not convinced this is worth their time, guess what? It makes you live longer. So you can make money by being more efficient. You can make more money, but then you have less time to spend it. So which would you rather have? Money or time and life? Well, I know what I choose.
Yeah, you said a couple of things I think are really important, that we need to care, and also that we need to learn, and that we have to do those things before we program AI to do them. Right? Because if we don't, then the AI is learning the wrong things. It's going the wrong direction. And that is incredibly dangerous.
Such a good point. And when thinking of sort of the discrepancy between the pace of industries, while we're still trying to figure out our legal system, or even understand our psychology, and yet technology is going, right? And that's the scary part. That's such a good point. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, all good, all good. It's conversation. Pinar, you asked why haven't we seen more allyship? And a few reasons. One is there's this thing called status quo bias, where if things are going the way you want them to go, if they're feeling good for you, there's this. It's also called loss aversion bias. This feeling that you don't, if things change, there's a loss for you, right? And so if the majority population in our workplaces, in our communities, is all feeling good about the way things are for them, there's that bias that's happening. The second is fear. The fear is real within allyship, and is more than fear. There's other things that happen when you first kind of start on the path of understanding. As you first start, when your allies kind of go through a series of behavior changes and it pass along that behavior change. And one of the first ones is kind of getting over, no longer denying that there's a problem, right? And when you do that, you kind of realize, this thing I thought was, this meritocracy I thought was there is not there. This belief that everybody can get where they want to because of because we work hard, and that's not true for a lot of people. A lot of people have to work 10 times as hard to get to the same place, and that kind of confronting that is hard for a lot of people. There is guilt involved, there is shame involved, guilt that you kind of were complicit in the system, shame involved in, well, I thought I worked really hard and that's why I got where I got, but there was also this privilege that took into play, that came into play, and that's hard for a lot of people. And so getting through those feelings is real and important for people to do. And then there's the fear as well, because it's new. Because people are saying, well, you're harming people. Well, I don't want to harm people. So then there's kind of this freezing that can happen if you have that fear and not taking action because you have a fear that you might do something wrong. But the reality is that we're doing more harm by not doing anything. Right. So I think that's a really important thing for all of us to realize, is that when we're not taking action, when we're inactive, we're harming. And then I will also say, over the last year, there's a lot of people that are completely burned out, and that is real. And we do have to give ourselves grace for that. But when you're doing so many things all at once, and including death and illness and complete change in a lot of people's work and life, and so burnout is real, and people only have certain capacity for emotions, for taking action, for the time. And when we are more stressed, we are less likely to have empathy for each other. So unfortunately, we have to work harder in those moments to have empathy, to really even just approach each other with empathy, let alone create change for each other. And so go ahead.
No, actually, you opened this door, Melinda. I think of conversations as being like a series of doors, and it's like this one. But you talked about burnout and you're so right. Oh my goodness! And so then it sparked that question in my mind of, how do we refill ourselves, guys?
Such a good point. Less technology. I feel like that's the immediate thing I'm thinking about, like Earth Day, nature, right? Like
exactly. There are a lot of studies that show that there's such a direct connection between your mental health and well-being, and how much time you spend in nature, how much natural green you see, whether you walk around in daylight, all of these things. So they're, in some ways, how we recharge ourselves is well understood. We just don't do it because, it's not efficient. And, I might see other people. Oh my goodness. And, that's the other thing. I love behavioral economics, right? So I was loving, recently, there's been this attention about serendipitous meetings. So it turns out, especially because now people are walking more, and one hopes some people who have the opportunity. And so they're seeing some neighbors and they're talking, and it's like, wow, guess what? That actually improves your mental health. It turns out that people tend to estimate that they will not enjoy talking to strangers. So actual studies have been done pre-pandemic. like, talking to the person next to you on the
True.
flight where you're like, oh, you're in economy and you're all bunched up and I really don't want to talk to anybody. I just put my headphones on and I don't, right? But actually it turns out if you talk to the person next to you, it's better for both of you. And it's not like you're going to be lifelong friends. No, but it actually is good for your mood and for your health. And so, we know how to help ourselves. We just are not taking the opportunities because we're so sucked into technology. And I want to point out, there's a question about that actually in the chat.
Yeah.
That we should take on. I don't know whose job is it to read. Did you want to read the question?
No, you can totally. I saw you're going to answer, so feel free to.
Yeah,
How about you're answering?
It's a great question. It really leads to the same. It's just very briefly, basically, it's a question about kids spending a lot of time on iPhones and tablets, younger and younger. And the question is this really entertaining? And well, is it educating them, or what impact might it have in the future? And I'll just say some thoughts on that. I'm sure everyone has lots to say, so I don't want to hoard the conversation, but because we do work on developmental technologies that are developmental, what we do know, for example, is that you can give very young children screens, and people do. They give screens to kids that are 6 months or sometimes even younger, and those children can process the visual and the auditory stimuli from those screens, but they cannot learn from them. So there's plenty of evidence developmentally that you are really just, so it's a great distraction, right? Like, especially if your kid is crying in the car, you give them a tablet, they stop crying. Can't say that I haven't done that, although not at 6 months. But they aren't learning and they aren't retaining. And then when they are learning and retaining, then what are they focusing on and what are they not seeing? So we do know, for example, let me give you a parallel scientific fact, that when parents are experiencing toxic stress and are not making eye contact with their infants, now we're talking really babies, the babies then have atypical eye gaze behavior, which is likely to affect their social skill and ability later in life. So, infants, kids, not just even babies, but kids are so malleable. Their brains are so adaptive. They're taking everything in. And what they're not getting is making a difference, because we're evolved in a particular way. We're evolved to interact with other people. We're highly social. And so I actually, since we know that parents who don't interact with their kids enough for a variety of reasons has a bad effect on the kids, what do you think is going to happen now that we have a generation of kids who don't get to see faces because of masks? So there's some serious kind of earth scale experiments happening, that we're not, so, when we just give kids technology and don't check whether it's okay, that's a societal scale experiment that's being done, and it's not controlled. There's no option out. So we do know that, there are all these issues with anxiety, and it is really scary what is happening. But there's also, you can't opt out, right? You can't say, okay, I'm just not going to be on technology, or I'm not going to let my kids do it. Look at all the little young kids who are developmentally not ready to be on screens in kindergarten, having to do education online, which of course it's safer than going in person, but at what cost developmentally? So these questions are, there are going to be some serious long-term outcomes from the pandemic, and they're already long-term outcomes. And so, people need to interact with people in real time in physical space for us to have the health and development and well-being. That's just a fact.
Right. What I'm hearing from all of you, and, whether it's like developmental stuff or even like, workplace culture and whatnot, like things that, so technology is so convenient. It can be fast, it can be responsive, or it can like automatically be proactive, not even responsive. So it's like giving us what we think we need, but we're complex beings, and our wants and needs don't necessarily always align, right? And yet again, so many of the other things we're talking about, like understanding human psychology, having empathy for one another, working, like reinventing the culture in the workplace, these all take work. And so we're like seeing this mismatch between the pace of like how we live and what we think is a good time and response for our needs. Like, oh, I ordered something, it should be here like now. Or like I sent a message, I want my response now. Or I'm on a call, I'm expecting good quality, no delays, nothing. Like we lost patience for everything because of all the convenience that we've been introduced to through technology. it seems like we're forgetting to slow down. And because of that, we're also not addressing these more ingrained issues that are in the system that is constantly feeding the industry because we're not addressing them in time, right? Like I think like you talk about this, Timothy, also like in like hackers mindset, like hackers are not problem solvers, they're solution finders. And I think that's actually one of like the biggest benefits of the industry, that it could actually be very proactive, right? It can like start creating solutions for like future problems that people are forecasting. Like we can actually do that in the industry. But yet again, these like same technologies, same processes, same softwares, AI, could also create like huge threats. And that is not because it's the industry's fault. It's because we as humans are not like addressing our like personal societal issues first, even before we build those. So like, how do we, I guess, like ensure, and this applies to many other industries, like, right, like it, even in like architecture, why don't we have more historians, anthropologists, sociologists in our meetings? Like we should. If we like, we're doing a public space project, how come it's only like engineers, architects, or like planners? Like where are the other like social sciences? And like we see this in our industry, and I think like technology industry, even though it's like one of the most collaborative industries, who is that collaboration with? Right? Like going back to diversity and inclusion. And are we actually even like diverse enough to be able to address all these, you know, varied issues that are feeding the industry and defining solutions without like addressing the problem first? So how do you think we sort of like enable that like actual diverse collaboration in the industry? And I guess we talked a little bit about like accepting and recognizing, you know, where we are at first and like addressing those issues, and then how do we move on from there?
Bring everybody to the table. That's that. I mean, people keep thinking of it as if it were some kind of mystery. I mean, I have to say I'm a very pragmatic person, right? So to me, this just doesn't seem like rocket science. I just don't think it's rocket science. Like, how hard is it? Like in research, for example, we have this idea called participatory action research. It has a PAR. It has a fancy name, but really all it means is that
Include people.
it's inclusion, right? Like if I'm developing something for children, well, then I must bring in children and parents and talk to them instead of just doing it on my own, which is yet what everyone does. You know, and then in companies, they do market research where they, you know, give surveys to people about things that they couldn't possibly answer because they're so abstract, that they give some kind of answers. But this is not market research, people. This is like seriously including people, right? So it just seems like a no-brainer. By the way, and I think other folks should address this, but if we're going to run out of time, there wasn't one other question in the chat, and it was about robots. So I'm going to have to take that at some point, just whenever.
Okay.
Oh, it is now the point. I feel sorry.
No. Everybody can go around. Then you can get to the question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go, Melinda.
I agree with you, and I think it's bringing everybody to the table all throughout the process, right? It's not just at the beginning when you're doing the research, right? It's you know, who is on the design team. Not just who is bringing people, you know, who are you bringing from outside, but who is on the design team, and how are you evaluating that product design all across the design process, including when it goes out the door, and then also like as it continues to go out into the world, how are you evaluating it? How are you making sure that it's continuing to be an inclusive product and designed to be equitable, designed to really create the change that should be made in the world? It really needs to be that whole process.
Timothy?
You know, it's so fascinating. Oh man, multiple things came to mind. The first thing that came to mind is that, so for example, I think I'm a 2-decade member of the National Medical Association, which is, you know, at some point in our history in our country, you know, people that look like me and people that look like my colleagues here on the panel, I guess figured that they couldn't talk about medical issues together, so they needed separate groups. And it was always fascinating to me because we'd go to medical discussions and the theme was always very much the same, just trying to get a seat at the table. Just trying to get a seat at the table. And I think that if there's one thing that I've heard, for sure from Maya and Melinda here is like, come on, it's not rocket science to say, hey, let's sit around the table together. But there is a part, there's another piece of this too, where it feels like at some point, and whoever, David Mamet says that, this filmmaker said, when he was talking about his process, and he said, it's always easy to point at the people across the street and say it was them. They're the reason we can't do this. They're the problem. They're the challenge. And I actually find that in some areas of technology, we're actually querying the technology even harder than we've queried ourselves. There's a project right now that some colleagues and I are working on in explainable AI, where the whole point is for the artificial intelligence not to just give you the black box result of 0 or 1 or yes or no, but to actually explain to you why it came to the conclusion that it did. And that is actually driven from an interesting concept called the right to an explanation. And I really feel like at some point, somewhere along the line, we stopped holding each other accountable for that right to explanation. Why are we doing it that way again? So I think someone put in the commentary about let's rebuild the table together, right? And so, or someone else just said maybe about building your own table. My thought there though is that, when did we stop holding ourselves sort of accountable in the respect that we could ask for an explanation, getting to an earlier question? And I think we're at a point now where people are saying, no, I don't think I want to do that anymore. I don't think I want to go along with that, because you should explain to me why this is the way that it is. It's something that came to mind for me when I think about the technology, and I think about the way that we're starting to query ourselves as human beings.
Oh, this is like so painful for me, because I feel like this could be like an all-day talk, and we can just like talk about things that people can come in and go as they wish. I hope we have time for that one day. But Maya, do you want to like address the question first before I move on to like one final question?
Yeah. I'm going to keep it really short. It's a very good question, and it deserves a lot of discussion, but I think I can get to it briefly. So the question is basically that as we develop technologies, and the question was about robotics, but really we're talking about in general technologies, are we replacing people with the technology, right? So are you going to give a kid a robot instead of having them interact with other kids? And definitely we should not be doing that, because for all the reasons that I mentioned, right? We're wired to be social creatures with other people. Machines are not complex or ready enough to do this. And in fact, they shouldn't be doing this. People should be there for people. The challenge is, how do we get from the current society where people are not there for people? So we don't have enough people who have been educated, trained, and compensated in order to take care of people, right? So we have elderly people abused and neglected. We have special needs kids being lumped into a single classroom when they have a variety of needs, cognitive, social, developmental, physical. Just lump them in a special ed classroom. And then those teachers have to deal with everything. And how are they supposed to be these magicians, right?
Right.
And so how do we get from the current society where people are not there for people to that one where we want to be? And then machines could really be doing the crappy stuff we don't want to do, which was the original idea of robotics. Dirty, dull, and dangerous, right? The stuff we don't want to do. So is it the case that we don't want to take care of people? Surely not. But how do we get there?
That's such a good point. And I think, it ties into like what you often talk about. And I guess this also ties into what we talked about, like capitalism, suddenly like robotics, like the benefits of automation and all of that sort of like dilutes this conversation of like the benefits of how the augmentation of AI with a human life could be so beneficial and enable a better future. And I think like no one in the end, this does not matter which gender, which race, which ability, like no one wants to feel excluded, right? So I think in any effort that sort of like really tries to build that inclusion from early on, and especially like at a young age, because if that child does not feel that they are, neglected, not considered, not accounted for, not designed for, if that child does not grow up with those ideas, they're not going to feel insecure or have mental health issues as they grow up. Like they're going to be confident individuals just with different needs or abilities or whatever. Like that does not matter. And so I think this is a perfect segue into like how we usually wrap up with like a piece of advice. I think, this is also going to be on, our podcast, and we have a very like mostly younger audience that listens to our podcast too. We really encourage all panelists to give like a quick advice to anyone who is going into a field to make progress or change the things that they see in the field that are wrong. And I do have a lot of faith in Gen Z and onwards. Like this is like we had a generation of like climate strikers. Like this did not happen before, right? So I think we're already in a much better trajectory in terms of like social responsibility and environmental responsibility. But what would your advice be to them as they are sort of resolving some of these issues we see in this industry and maybe others?
Who wants to go first? All right, I'll go first. My answer to everything is grit. The thing I tell my students is, do not expect to get what you think you deserve. Instead, you have to fight for it. It takes tremendous energy, tremendous conviction, but you have to do it, and you have to do it because you're not doing it for you, you're doing it for everyone else. So don't think of it about you and then think about how very tired you are. It's not about you. It's about the larger world. And that's why you keep pushing. So whatever your metaphor is it leaning in? Is it pushing? Is it fighting on? Whatever it is, you have to get up every day and do it. And yes, it's exhausting, but it's very profoundly meaningful. I think that is the one and only answer. And then you find other people who are also pushing, and then you're in it together, and that makes it incredibly worth it. And you see outcomes, and we just have to all do it.
Amazing. Who's next?
Melinda, I was yielding to you on that one.
It always feels like it's like the hardest part. You want to say so many things, and then like I'm asking you to like say a 5-second pitch almost. Yeah.
I would say, collaborate. Don't do it alone. Don't, if you feel like you're alone, no, you're not, and find somebody else who believes in it as well, has the same passion. Look for somebody who's doing it too. So many people kind of come to a problem and immediately go to what's the solution I'm going to build. That solution might be already being built, and you can help empower it, grow it, make it better, build a movement, so that we really, that the movements are what really fundamentally change the world. So figure out what movement you're going to work on and build that together with other people.
That is so powerful. I'm so glad I yielded on that one. I'm gonna keep it very simple because I don't think I could say it any more eloquently than Maya Melinda. The first thing I would say is, it's tough. Maya, went right on in saying, hey, look, it's hard. It takes tremendous energy, and it does. First, seek to understand, and then seek to be understood. And then the sort of the second piece is something that Melinda just sort of reminded me of, which is there's an old African proverb that says, you can go fast alone, but we can go far together. I think we've already demonstrated that we can go fast.
Oh, such a good way to like wrap it. And that was so good. So we're basically saying, find your meaning and push for it, or choose your metaphor for it. We're collaborating, and we basically, and what you said, Timothy, at the end, it just merges both, like collaborate with others and like push for that together.
I love that.
So thank you so much, everyone. This like really does need to be an ongoing conversation. So I hope, people could like continue to reach out to you after like listening to these talks, or even like, I'm hoping this provokes some thought and, triggers some ideas, or even like action or thinking process, or what should I research on or read next. So thanks everyone for joining, and thank you so much, Maya, Melinda, Timothy, for your time today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And guys, I got to say, this group needs to get together for a good meal. This discussion
Yes.
is amazing.
Wow, this was
Agreed.
awesome. I know.
We might do this annually. We'll see.
Timothy, I have to visit you at ASU. I was just there virtually, but it's not the same.
Oh, no, come on down. We would be happy to host you, happy to have dinner. You and Melinda both come on down and enjoy
Awesome.
some sunshine with us.
Absolutely.
Sunshine I could use. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.